Again, I am Michael T. Smith. This is the Church of, and here is your message for the week of July 21st, 2024. We have been dealing with on cults and cultism, and you're going to want to take some notes today on cults and cultism, and bringing clarity to what makes something a cult, what makes a behavior cultism, and we're inching our way toward that, and we've been kind of laying that out. And this series, somebody say, well, I was with you in the first series and kind of left you a little bit. Well, the first week, then the second week I was totally in. The third series I kind of lost you, but now I'm back in. This is going to make a lot of sense. I was thinking about. So there's escape rooms. Connie and I like to do escape rooms. We have some friends that like to do escape rooms. Our kids like to do escape rooms. And there was this friend of ours telling us that they were in an escape room, which was kind of this live interactive thing where there was a zombie or something was in the room with them, all chained up. But as the clock ticked down in this escape room, you have to solve it to get out. Every 5 minutes or whatever, the zombie's chain got longer, so the zombie could get closer to you, right? The zombie's chain got longer and chain got longer. And I was telling you last week about Kenobi, my dog, and we used to have him on the little 6-inch or 6-foot leash, and then we got him the little zip line. And when he first got it, man, he would take off thinking I'm free, and that chain would snap him back. And so then we got him the body harness, which he Houdini's that. My dog, it's like you'll be walking with him, he'll have both feet out of it, and it'll just be resting on his back, and then you'll turn your head and he'll come back and have both feet back in. I don't know how he does that, but in our religious training, in our religious conditioning, it's like we're on this kind of zip line, this kind of chain that but it only lets us go so far. And this series on cult and cultism, it's intentionally built, it's design built to not only to remove the false illusion of how far, how much liberty, how much insight into God. We go so far, but we keep getting pulled back into this religious blindness, this blindness of false religion. This message, hopefully, and what happened the first week, second week, and now third week, will remove that chain from you. And it's going to explain, as I've received your letters, as I've received your emails, as I've received your cards, beautiful card yesterday, it's hopefully going to explain so much of what has been going on in your spirit over the last days, the last weeks, the last months. Some of you, years, have written and say, for years, I've known what? That as far as I feel like the chain, the zip line of traditional Christianity lets me out, I feel like it's stuck. And say, well, you just want to get out there so you can sin. No, I want to get out there so I can know God as God is. Somebody asked last week, was that Oswald Chambers or who was that that said that statement? Turns out I had it wrong. It was C.S. Lewis, right? God, I want to know you, the prayer, not as I think you are, but as you know yourself to be. And so, God, we want to know God as God knows God self to be. And as it relates to our relationship with traditional Christianity, trad Christianity, if you will, a lot of things are being explained. And again, last week, it was almost like a switch was flipped. It was like we were seeing it one way, and then it just came in to clarity. And what we're trying to do in this series is to help you locate, and I'm just taking my time and giving you this idea, to help you locate what is taking place in your knower. And that's a good thing, because things are happening in your knower. We have a deep-seated knowing, an intuitive knowing. The writer of Romans posited the idea that which can be known of God is already deposited inside every human being. John 1:4, the writer posits this idea that the light of God has lit the spirit of every human being coming into the world. And so that when we come into the knowledge of God, we are not coming into the knowledge of something outside of us. We are coming into the knowledge of something that is the deepest knowing within us. So part of this series is not only the hope to explain what's been churning in your heart these past weeks, months, years, as it relates to traditional Christianity. You're saying something's not right here, but really to also locate and give voice to what's happening in your knower, and what that thing in your deepest knowing, your deepest intuitive knowing, that has been trying to supplant our religious knowledge, our conditioned religious knowledge. So a deposited knowing, right? A deposited intuitive knowing by God, buckling the floor of our foundation, our taught, conditioned religious foundation. And I understand that this is scary, but it's only scary to people who have not yet positioned themselves to receive truth, who have not yet done the first step in order to receive truth. As I was preparing these notes and as I thought about this, and I saw kind of like a bolted down, maybe an old mailbox, an old metal, like a blue box on the corner, one of those old blue, you put the mail in up at the post office, or they come and pick it up twice a day or whatever. I see those things bolted down, right? The bolts bolting down the concrete. And what's happening is they've been loosed, right? These revelations, these bubblings up, what the writer of the scripture would call the fermentation, right? It talks about the old vessels can't handle the new wine because one translation says the violence of the fermenting new wine would break the vessel. So there's a subsurface rumbling and bubbling up within a foundation, and we start to notice that which was firmly planted is kind of rattling around on its foundation, and we kind of feel like, man, if I rock this thing a couple times, I'm gonna bust a bolt here, and I'm gonna be able, and what are we gonna do? We're gonna get down underneath the ground to see what that water flow is underneath our supposed religious foundation. And so we begin with the first step. And the first step, I won't go into detail. I've covered it 2 weeks, but I just have to give you this. The first step, and someone say, why are you saying this again? Because when one of you so precious reached out to me this past week and said, I got it, I see the first step. The first step is the thing. The first step into the possibility of theological fullness. What do I mean by theological fullness? The first step toward the large possibility, the vast possibility of full sight into God. Do I ever believe we'll have full sight in this life? I do not. Do I believe there is much more full-sightedness beyond what we've been conditioned in our religious foundation? I certainly do. The first step into the possibility, there's a possibility of seeing fully. There's a possibility of theological, religious fullness. What is that? A glimpse at truth that is large, but not just truth that is large, that is enlarging. That first step is, it begins, you can't take that first step, you can't make that first step until, here it is, you relinquish your claim to private religion, until you relinquish your supposition about private ownership of God. And what I mean by that there's somehow this salvific, fancy word, I don't mean to be fancy words, there's somehow this plan of salvation that is private, revealed to a few people, and it's up to those few people to distribute, disseminate, publish, proselytize in a credible way that people receive it, or else the non-receivers of that are eternally damned. And you cannot step into truth. You cannot step into a view of God. The possibility for theological and religious fullness is not even accessible to you unless you first, like we talked about last week, Homer Simpson trying to steal that soda out of the machine, right? Until you first let go of the soda, and then you could until you first let go of this idea, well, we have something that the Muslims don't, the Jews don't, the Hindus don't, the atheists certainly don't, the gays can only pretend to have. We have an access to God that nobody else has, and if you just sign up for our plan and say yes and check these 11 boxes and then promise to commit yourself, that fine print of salvation. They say if every head bow and every eye is closed, if you're not sure if you die today where you'd spend eternity in heaven or in hell, would you go to heaven in the gates and blah, 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 would you bust hell wide open and enter into a flame of torment there? And if you're not sure where you'd spend right now, I just want you to raise your hand right now. If that's a neuro-linguistic program, and every the hands go up, every head bow, every eyes closed, and then now, if you raise your hand, I want you to stand. See, we're taking a little bit more. Now, raise your hand. I want you to stand. Okay, stand up right now. And you stand 1, 2, you stand up. Now, those of you who are standing, nobody looking around, nobody's going to know it's you. Oh, everybody's going to know it's you. Come on down to the front of the auditorium. And, and then we're going to say this prayer. And after you say the prayer, you say, have I met it yet? Well, no, we're going to go to the prayer room. You go to the prayer room. Somebody says, well, here's some of this, some of this, some of this. You want to start attending church. You want to start reading a Bible. You want to start praying. You want to start getting discipleship, blah, blah, blah. And here's what you're going to have to do to give. And here's what you're going to have to do to serve. And here's what you're going to have to do to witness. And here's what you're going here's the fruit. And then, well, what happens if I don't raise my hand? What happens if I don't stand up? What happens if I don't come down front? What happens if I don't say the prayer? What happens if I don't go to the prayer room? What happens if I don't do the 16 steps? And what happens if I don't stay faithful to those steps? Well, then you have violated the plan You violated the plan God gave the world for eternal salvation of their souls. And if you violated that plan, then there is a price to pay for that. And it's not a price that you did wrong. It's just a price that you refused the plan. That's what's so dark. I would rather go to, well, I think it's more plausible that the good people go to heaven and the bad people go to hell than it is plausible that the people who follow our plan go to heaven and people who follow a different plan go to hell. And again, I'm not a believer in hell, although we could argue maybe a little bit of that. I know there's people that pull up at our local food bank in their Mercedes and their Bentleys and everything else and go get all the meat for their dogs because, well, it's cheaper here. So, I mean, there may be an argument for hell. I kid, of course. I don't want anybody going to hell. And that's just blindness, right? Anybody that blind and that self-absorbed, they're just one revelation of Christ away from total change. And so until we relinquish our hold, our grasp, our supposition that we own it and nobody else does, we're not even step one, toe one. You don't even have your little toe, your big toe in the water of truth unless you first give up this idea that there is a private way to God. And so this threshold, and maybe this will help you here. There's a threshold. Up here is true religion on your screens here. This is true religion. Oh, not there. Okay. All right. Give me 1 second here. That's weird. Well, let's try this. Sorry, everybody. Talk amongst yourselves. Somebody said, what is the big deal? I need this iPad today. It's got, here we go. Hey, here we are. So we've got, thank you, friends, true religion. And there's a threshold between true religion and down here is, we'll go false religion. True religion and false religion. And there is this green grass area, right? Between there, this threshold, Deuteronomy is this kind of recap book of, everywhere that they've been through everything, and now they're getting ready to go into the promised land. And where they stand, their toes are on the promised land. And in the story, God says, okay, let's go back over how we came out of here and what the commandments are and what the law was and what God did to Egypt and where I'm taking you. And when you get there, you don't want to die from all the, by choosing not to believe me and all these other kind of things. And it's this threshold, right? This threshold that you have to cross. And the threshold, the way you cross from false religion to true religion, the way you get over into this place is you must give up all claims of something private, of something owned. And if not, true religion just stays out of reach, right? It seems so real, I can feel it. It seems so real, I can taste it. It seems so real, I can see it. But why can't I touch it? I'll tell you why you can't touch that true religion. Because it begins with forsaking this idea. So last week we examined the question. Let's move on here. And somebody said, why'd you go back over that? Well, it's important. We examined the big question. And the big question is this. It's coming back on your screens now. The big question is this. How, we're right over here, how, by what means or what mechanism can an individual escape God's eternal wrath, justice, punishment upon their immortal soul? How does a person get saved, right? That's the question. And from our traditional religion, it's, well, God gave that plan to 12 people, 11 people, then replaced it, and then gave that plan to 500 people, and 500, about 380 rejected, 120 said, I'll sign up, and then about 3,000, then about 5,000, then some people fell off, and then he told one guy some private stuff that one of the other 12 guys didn't agree with, and then there was a 13th guy that came in, and he told all 12 of them they didn't know the truth, but he had the actual truth, and so this how it, and now we have the actual truth, and if I knock on your door, and if I tell you, and if I live in a credible way, or if I come to your country, or if I pull up my boat, whatever it is, I'll give you the plan. And that is how you do what? That God is going to punish everybody. He's going to mete out justice on everybody. He's going to bring eternal wrath on everybody who doesn't follow our plan. And our idea of plans goes in these things. So find a decent color palette here. Maybe we'll go down here. So the plan number one is very simple, and I hope you catch this. So plan number one right up here is Jesus, RW, his redemptive work, that he died on the cross for mankind's sins, and that dying for the sins paid the price. It assuaged God's wrath. And God doesn't look at humanity anymore. He looks at, he kind of beat up Jesus and got blood out of Jesus because he got tired of the blood of animals. And now that Jesus has died and shed his blood, the whole world is saved. And we call that inclusion. And notice down here on your screen, this thing about the plus sign. I don't even know if you can see the plus sign. I hope you can see it on your screen, but there's a little plus sign here on every one of these things. And the plus sign is an additional condition. It's an additional transaction. And the plus sign is indicative of an excluder. Now, what do you mean an excluder? That once you add a plus to something, whoever doesn't go with that plus is excluded out of the salvific plan. So in this first answer here to the question, how do you get out of wrath? Well, you'll notice that the first answer is plus nothing. And we call that inclusion. That Adam messed up everything by Adam's decision. You and I, all humanity has been paying a price for that mess up for all eternity and all time immemorial, right? Has been going on. But Jesus steps in, and we didn't have to believe, we didn't have to act, we didn't have to do anything wrong to get in Adam's mess up. We don't have to do anything right to get in Jesus' obedience. And that's the idea of inclusion. So that's the first thing. It's Jesus plus nothing at all. And then we come on down here to Jesus' redemptive work, and now we have a condition right here. And that condition, that transaction or the excluder is faith. What do I mean by that? It's really a commanded faith. This is very interesting. It's not if you believe it, it's unless you believe it. Jesus' redemptive work, the death, burial, resurrection, plus the condition of you have to believe it. And we refer to that generally, and some people have different understandings of this, as grace, which is all you got to do is believe. Now, keep in mind, back up here, all you got to do is nothing. But down here, there is a condition. There is a transaction. What do we bring to the table? So again, think of the idea. Well, what do we do to bring to the table to get punishment from Adam? Nothing. So what do we do to bring blessing from Jesus? Well, we have to do something. So we're adding in conditions and transactions. And so we move on a little bit further, and I'm not going to go too detailed in this, but it's important. Then we get to number 3, which is Jesus' redemptive work. There's a condition plus faith, and there's a condition, and that condition is confirming works, which is what? That if you know Jesus, if you're saved and you know it, clap your hands. If you're saved and you know it, clap your hands. If you're saved and you know it, then your works will surely confirm it. They'll surely show that you know it. And these works are energistic. And somebody say, what does energistic means? And there's debates about these terms. I'm just using them loosely. Energistic means there is God working in you. God working in you to bring forth these confirming works. That if you have Jesus plus commanded faith, I have faith, and now I'm going to see if that faith is genuine. So somebody says, well, I believe, and they say, well, have you changed at all? Well, no, I haven't changed at all. Well, then I question the legitimacy of your faith, which is why, because if I don't see confirming works, then I have a question on whether or not your faith is legitimate. So it's not just Jesus, it's Jesus plus faith. It's not just Jesus plus faith, it's Jesus plus faith with some sort of works that show that you're legit, right? So we know this. I don't have to go too much into it. Now, number 4, Jesus plus faith plus not confirming works, but cooperating works, which is what? That don't just look at God to change your life. Yeah, God is working in you, Philippians 2:12, what? 13, what does it say in Philippians? It says, work out your own salvation. That's us working, right? For it is God that worketh in you, and we call these a synergistic. Think about it, synergy, right? So this God effort, divine working in you, and your choice to do good works. We don't have confirming works, which so, okay, your faith actually stuck, it's actually real, because we can see some change. And think of all the preaching you've heard. Don't just come down to this altar and say a prayer and put on a cross, and 10 years later, we don't see any change in you. If you really got saved, we would see a change. So It's not if you really got saved, you would change. It's if we really got saved, we would see a change. Well, that's what's up here under the energistic works. If you really got saved, there would be works to confirm it. But now we're saying, if you really got saved, don't just look at God and say, well, I don't know why my life isn't changing. I don't know why I'm still drinking. I don't know why God's supposed to do. It's not just God in the fourth. It's not just God. The way you get saved is, yeah, God is working, but you've got to cooperate with that working. And so they call it a synergistic salvation. And again, these are debatable terms. Somebody say, why do you keep saying debatable terms? And this is an interesting idea. Because none of the smartest theologians on the planet can agree on which of these five. There are books. A friend of mine gave me a book. He says, you need to read this book. And I read the book, and they present four. They present number 2, 3, 4, and 5 as the thing. And a person that says, I believe it's number 2, he writes his thing, and these are all he's, which is a telling thing, but not that there's anything wrong with he's, but I'm just saying there's really sadly, no respected theologians at that high of a level, but I mean, they're coming along, but anyway, that are not male. So the second guy goes, it's number 2, and anybody that doesn't believe it's grace plus faith is an idiot. And then the people that believe number 3, number 4, and number 5, they all argue with him. He writes 10 pages, and then this one guy writes 10 pages, 10 pages, 10 pages, and they say you're wrong. And then this guy gets to respond. Here's where you don't see, here's where you don't see. And then the other guy goes. Somebody say, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. It's just a finger. You know this, right? You know this. And then the second guy goes, no. It's not just faith. It's not just Jesus. It's not just faith. It's faith plus confirming works. And writes 10 pages, and this guy goes, that's ridiculous. And this guy goes, you're so stupid. And this guy goes, that's insane. You can't do that. It's shocking. What you're saying is nuts. And then this guy says, oh yeah? And he starts writing back to the thing. And then number 3, and then number 4. And somebody said, well, how could they possibly disagree? I don't know how they could disagree. I mean, don't we all have the same Bible? Don't we all have the same Hebrew and Greek and Chaldean and Latin? And don't we all have the same patristic research? And don't we all have knowledge of the same? I mean, how is there a debate on the most important thing when we all using the same source material? Well, the answer is some people start out and with this as their anchor volley. And they say, well, here's the rule and this is the exception. Somebody else comes along and says, no, that's the rule. Your rule is not the rule, it's the exception. And we go round and round and round on what? On the most important question of all time, which is what? How? By what mechanism can an individual? And there's a lot of debate between 2, 3, 4, and 5. Here's what most of them believe. They believe it is definitely not Jesus plus nothing. I mean, most people agree. I mean, all educated theologians agree on that. And so we rinse and repeat. So let's go forward here. Now, and so we get to number 5. Number 5 on your screens is Jesus, redemptive work, plus faith, plus these are commanded works, which is what God says, don't look at me. I did the saving. You now go out and bring forth fruit worthy of. You go out and live worthy of. I'm commanding you, which is what? Yeah, you're saved. Yeah, you have faith. But if you're not doing the right thing, as a matter of fact, if you're doing the wrong thing when you die, if you're doing the wrong thing when I return, if the music stops and you got caught with something unconfessed and unrepented of, guess what? You might as well have never believed at all, because you are right back here in this stuck. You answered the question, how do I get saved? How? By Jesus' redemptive work. You answered it by faith. You answered it by commanded works, but oh my gosh, the last day you fell back into sin and you weren't watching when the thief came and you bust hell wide open. This is the debate. This is the question. This is the essence of traditional Christianity. And of course, we come to this point here. Let me see if I can break this down for you. When you have this first one here, inclusion, I want you to know this. It is 100% of all people that have ever lived are included. Right? Notice here, there's no transaction. There is no excluder. So right now, that puts you at about 7 billion people are all in. Why? Because if it's Jesus fully satisfied it, and there's no condition, 7 billion people are in. But it's not just these 7 billion, it's how many have passed away over the time. They're all in. Not only that, but before Jesus came, how many were before that? They're all in. That if you go to the highest, most magnanimous idea, the most blasphemous idea of it, then that's where you are. But as you go down, right? As you work down the line, As you work down the line, well, we're going to just call this the devil, right? But as you work down the line here to 2, 3, 4, 5, guess what happens? Instead of all forever, you get few, very few. You get a remnant. So much so that some people believe it's only 144,000, depending on what doctor you go. Well, that's not what the 144,000 means. That's not what it means to you, but that's what it means to some. Right? So the farther you go down the list, the fewer and fewer are involved. Now, if you're incredibly gracious, just like, oh my gosh, I'm just so magnanimous in my thought of God and my Jesus is very good, then you would say this, that if you deal with this grace only, you're talking about 2.2 billion people currently that are in. That's pretty good. It leaves about 5 billion people out. But hey, man, that's pretty big. There's about 2 billion people that have said, I believe, and that's enough. But if you say, well, wait a minute now, how many of those people that said a prayer are actually showing fruit? Well, that number is going to go down. I mean, right now, most Protestants will say the Catholics are down. Well, very few Catholics are in, right? That's what we've been conditioned. Well, now, how many of those are showing the fruit that they're really living actively the Christian life with the help of God? Well, now the number goes down. How many of those people would be ready if they were to die at this moment, would have no unconfessed sin, no unrepentant sin, no active sin in their life? Well, the number just keeps going down. Now, let's go on a little bit further. Here's the big struggle. The big struggle is that most of us start right here. This is where I started. That it's not enough to say a prayer. It's not enough to have faith. It's not enough to do good for 10 years. You could do good for 10 years, solid for 10 years, sober, don't cuss, don't chew, don't fornicate, don't run with those that do, and on year 10, day 1, slip into some sort of lustful thought, and your whole thing would be undone. That's where I came in. Which is what? That's why you're always confessing. That's why every time I got on a roller coaster, Father, I confess my sins. Every time Lord, I confess my sins. If I were to die today, Lord, what would we do? Lord, any sin I've done that I haven't done, that I don't know, sins of omission, sins of commission, whatever I might do, whatever I'm thinking about doing, whatever I forgot about. Why? I'm always trying to shore up. Why? Because when you live at the bottom rung here, you're living at a place where, very few people are in. And the argument, the fight, the disputation of anybody suggesting, well, I don't think it's us, I think it's God in us. And somebody else say, well, I don't think it's really God in us, I think it's, God just, it's not God and us, it's God in us. And when you get to a place where a person says, you really don't have to do anything, if you believe, it doesn't matter if you have zero evidence of all, belief is the only thing. And the infighting that takes place here is where the church, the church was marching 2 by 2. The theologians stopped to tie their shoe, and the rest of everything else went on marching down into the religious mire to get out of the insane. So this is what, now, and I'm going to say this, if you are even remotely going to suggest, I think when people get to this level right here, number 2, they say, come on. They say, come on. I've already given you this. I've already given you how you have to believe. What else do you want? There's no bigger. And I say, well, what about just Jesus' redemptive work plus nothing? I just can't see it. I can't see it. I just can't see that God would do something for the whole world and they didn't have to do anything. Well, did they do anything to get into it? No, they didn't. But I just can't see that. Look, God has solved 4 out of 5 for you. Come on, you got to do something. God's just not going to just give it out. And so you can't, and I'm going to tell you this, ask me how I know. When I got up to this place here, and I said, well, I'm starting to think, you want to talk about an unpopular place. You want to talk about where people just don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. Why? Because you just have the nerve to believe, well, this is ridiculous. That you put a private plan in that I got to distribute through very ineffective distributors who have terrible ratings on the Better Business Bureau and terrible ratings on Open Table and Yelp and Google. They terrible ratings of all sorts of awful things that the church has done. And the churches, governments have done it, industries have done it, businesses have done it. Don't make the church, anytime we have that type of institutional capacity, it's everywhere, right? secular, religious, Hindu, Muslim, straight, gay. It's humans are everywhere. But if you come to this idea that here's what it is, Mike. Why can't it be number one? Because you can't have an institution if it's number one. You can't put clause into something if it's number one. If God has done all to satisfy God and humans have to do nothing, well, how can I get people to sign up for the show? How can there be a good us and a bad them if there's nobody that's done a conditioner or a transaction or if there's no excluder, if there's nothing that makes it private to us, then what good is the religion? So when you get up to this level here and start suggesting that it's nothing, and then you think you're there. But here's the thing. This number one, when you get to the place where you say, nobody owns it, it's open to everybody. Jesus' redemptive work settled everything for everything. Somebody say, whew, we finally reached truth. No, you did not reach truth. This is not truth. Jesus' redemptive work on the cross, died for everybody, satisfied God's wrath, and nobody has to do nothing. They don't even have to know about it. They're saved and they don't even know it. Man, I finally reached truth. To get to that, you feel like you ripped your whole soul in half. Oh my gosh, I'm so scared to say that. That's not truth. Someone say, what is that? That's the threshold. When you get to number one, to say, you know what, I don't think it's private. I don't think anybody got to do anything. I don't think God gave the secret out to some people and not to anybody else. I just think God has satisfied, and that the answer to what somebody has to do to get out of the thing is nothing. God's already paid that price, and nobody has to know anything. Whew, I finally reached truth. No, you haven't. You reached the threshold of giving up privatization. You've reached the threshold of giving up a claim that there's a small group that has a salvific secret that nobody else has. When you get to that first top one here, you've not given up, you've not reached truth, you've reached the threshold by which you can start taking your first step into truth. Once you've said, okay, nobody owns it, it would be ridiculous for somebody to own it. It would be ridiculous for God to say, it was messed up not by people, but I can't fix it for people. As a matter of fact, I can only fix it for about 2 billion of the 7 billion people. And once you get past all that ridiculousness, it's not, I know the truth, Jesus paid it all, nobody has to believe we're in. No, that just is the relinquishing of the false claim of privacy. Because once you're ready for truth, you get to this, that this entire idea is ridiculous. This entire idea that God can only be satisfied by someone paying a price to assuage God's wrath. That God's thirst for vengeance or justice or whatever name we put on it, that God has to have it made right so bad that blood has to be shed. That somehow Christ, who is supposed to show us God, supposed to reveal to us who God is, that Christ has to stand in front of us so that God doesn't put the smackdown on us, because God is not at all like Christ. Christ is this good part and God is the bad part. Or God is the meter out of all punishment, but Jesus is I can look past it, as though they're not one and the same. The problem with this idea, the problem with this question, is that it asks us to believe things that are fundamentally contrary to Christ. Everything we see of Christ is forgive them, your sins are forgiven, your sins are forgiven. Forgive them, your sins are forgiven. Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Everything we see of Christ. Who is this that forgives sins only? He did it without blood. He did it without sacrifice. He did it without exchange. He talked about the parable. Let's say a person owes $50 and a person owes $5,000, and the other one just says, well, I just forgive all that debt. And the word there is, I just show grace to you, and I just let it go. And that is what we have been revealed of Christ. Well, God ain't that way. God got to have some blood. God got to have some sacrifice. Jesus was just forgiven on credit. He was putting it on his tab there because he knew he was going to pay the full price later. I'm telling you, it's not our blindness in the church is not trying to think ourselves up from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2. That's as high as I can go. Maybe I can go to 1. I just can't say that publicly. Getting to 1 in your heart is not where you say, I finally got the truth. Getting to 1 in your heart is the day you say, the whole idea that God would be so petty and so punitive and take a Muslim baby or a Jewish baby or a Hindu baby or somebody else born into a place where they were told and conditioned their whole lives, that their religion is true and that they have the right true and that they have the private salvific plan and that God is like, you sucker, you just fell for the wrong plan. We have the right plan over here. That entire idea is ridiculous. So it is not the answers that are the problem. It's the question. The church has spent the better part of 1,800 years distracted by debating. Is it 5? Is it 4? Is it 3? Well, it might be 2. It might be halfway between 2 and 3, and it's ridiculous. We've said, well, I don't believe it's commanded works, but I do believe it's commanded faith. You have to believe. It's ridiculous. And the real issue is once you get to once you get to here and you can get past the threshold and you can start seeing how silly this is, now you're ready for the real question. And what is that real question? The real question is not what happens, how do we get the wrath of God off us? The real question is, who is Christ? Who is Christ? If Christ is not the answer to a false question, if Christ is not the remedy to an antichrist idea of God, if the whole question is not whose team do you got to be on and what things you got to do before time runs out and you bust hell wide open, if that's not the question, then what is the question? The question is, then who is Christ? What is going on here? Who is this that has transformed us? Who is this that has marked us? Who is this that we know experientially? Who is this who is this figure that has altered the entire world? Who is Christ? Now we're on to a question. Let's answer the question today. But I want to start with this idea before I get in. I know if you haven't heard anything I've said, hear this. I don't even know if anybody's out there. If you're out there, I hope you're still there. If you're thinking about leaving, don't leave now. This is where we're getting to it. The question is, who is Christ? I want to take you in your noodle. We don't have time to go there in your noodle. Just go to John chapter 5 in your brain. You can look it up later. John chapter 5 starts with this idea that there is a pool called Bethesda, right? That pool of Bethesda. And there's a story there that at one time an angel came down and troubled the waters and that anybody that got in there was healed. And so there's all these sick people at the temple waiting in these 5 porches, and they're waiting for the water to be done. And when the water is troubled, they rush down, and whoever gets in the first pool first is healed. We know the story. Jesus comes up to a man that's been there. He's been there for 30-some years, and he says to the person, he says, well, would you like to be made whole? He says, tell me about it. I'm here every day. I'm clocking in, right? I'm out here. I'm trying to be first one here. The problem is I have to drag myself down there, and when the pool goes, by the time I start, what was that guy? It wasn't a little Tink Tink, whatever the guy's name was in Major Pain. I don't remember what it was, but it might have been. But as I start coming, he says somebody always gets in before me, and I get stuck. I just can't do it. So I go back and I wait again. I try to get close, but I can't. Everybody's so much faster than me. So Jesus says, well, that's easy. I can fix that for you. He says, he heals the man, and he says, pick up your bed and stuff and go walking. And just go on home. So the guy is miraculously healed after 30-some years, nearly 4 decades. He scoops up his bed. He starts walking away. And the Pharisees come, who were not bad people. They were just trying to protect. They were trying to keep the nation right, so God didn't punish the nation. And that's, of course, we know how dark and demonic that is. But the guy's carrying his bed, and he's walking. And they come up to him, and they say, excuse me, I notice you're carrying your bed. House of notice happens to be Saturday. You're not able to do that today. So I'm going to have to write you a ticket here. You're in the temple violating one of Moses' commandments. And he says, look, I understand what Moses said, and I understand we're not supposed to do any work. I understand we're not supposed to lift a finger. I understand that kind of thing. And I certainly know what you guys teach. But he says this, unfortunately, though, the guy that healed me, hear this, John chapter 5, the guy that healed me told me to pick up my bed and walk with it. He says, so I totally hear what you guys are saying, and I respect you tremendously, but the guy that healed me told me to carry my bed. Now, you know the story. But here's the part. The Pharisees looked at the man and said, well, who is it that healed you? And the man said, I don't know who it was. I don't know who it was. So the Pharisees like, you don't know who it was? No, a guy walked up. He said, I was healed. He told me to pick up my bed. I started walking. Who was he? I don't know. What was his name? I don't know. Where's he from? I don't know. Well, the case is dismissed. The man is walking out. He's leaving the temple. Jesus comes up to him. Psst, hey, bub. Hey. Now, here's where it gets kind of dark. I don't believe this is true. So you're disagreeing with the Bible. I'm just telling you a story. I think that, there's 10 verses of the Bible you say totally, and then there's a verse in there, which I just think is demonic. But you already know that about me. And he turns out, he says, look, don't ever do anything else bad or more sickness is going to come on you, which we know is not even consistent with the book of John itself, but neither here nor there. And it turns out that it's Jesus that healed the man. And he finds out who Jesus is. The man goes back to the Pharisees and says, hey, I figured it out. It was the Jesus fellow that everybody's talking about. That guy over there, that's the one who heals me. And the next verse says, and the Pharisees said, let's kill him. Let's kill him because he healed on the wrong day. Now, you take that Bible story for whatever you want, but here's my purpose in giving it to you today. That it's possible to have the miracle power of God, the transforming power of God, the life-changing redemptive power of God operating in a person's life, in our lives. That Christ's power had done something. Christ's power had changed a person. Christ's power had lifted him out of 4 decades, nearly 4 decades of bondage. That it's possible for that to happen and to have zero idea anything about the person that did it. This man was healed by God, telling people he was healed, walking in that healing. Life changed after 40 years, 30 some odd years, of 38 years of just living in desperation, totally transformed. Who did it? I don't know. And before we get into the answer of who is Christ, I'm suggesting to you that it is possible that I, you, me, we, us, so many of us have been miraculously transformed by something, by this being that either is Christ or this being that is connected through the personification in the iconography of Christ, through the personalization as the person of Christ, born in Bethlehem, born of virgin, incarnation of God, death, burial, resurrection, whatever it is that has changed us. I am submitting to you that it is possible that we have been changed by something we know very little about. And that it's possible that people are transformed by something and then brought into a religious setting and having that transformation contextualized in a way, here's what happened to you. This is what I know for sure. I know that at age 7, I went to a vacation Bible school and they gave me all these coloring sheets between 6 and 7. And they gave me all these coloring sheets. And in the coloring sheets, it had Jesus feeding the people and Jesus blessing the children. And then the last week, this nice lady, I'd never been to church, at the front of the room, she says, now listen, if you need to ask Jesus in your heart, if you want to ask Jesus in your heart, you just say, Jesus, come into my heart. And I went home that night and I just thought about this man who had done all these things for all these people. And he was so kind in all the pictures and he was so helpful and he was feeding people and he was helping people and he was hugging the lepers and all this other kind of stuff. And I said, I want you in my heart. And I thought of my heart opening up like a cuckoo clock. And I said, and my little heart came out and the little Jesus stood on it. The little Jesus that was up on the wall and inside the little Sunday school classroom. And that little Jesus again. And my heart closed. That impacted me so much that on my wall, right behind me on my wall here, there's a cuckoo clock hanging that my mother gave me 30 years later and said, I want you to have this because I know it means something to you. And every day, the little cuckoo, and I don't see the little cuckoo clock. I think of that's me at 7 years old trying to imagine what am I saying? That I had a real experience with God that had zero context, zero understanding, zero rationality at all, but something impacted me. At 10 years old, I was in Westminster Abbey. I was in London for a business trip. My mom had a business trip, and there was one of her employees, and they said, I'm going to the midnight mass on Easter Eve, and they had said, if Michael would like to come, and I was like, yeah, I'll go. My second time going to church, and I went in, and I did, and it's beautiful, and Jesus, and they're talking the Christmas story, and the Virgin, and everything else, and how he came, and I just knelt down, and everybody knelt down, and they pulled out the little prayer things. I didn't know what was happening. I knelt down, and I sat there, and again, I have this experience with love. So much so that I went out to the bookstore, the thing, and I said, and I bought a cross, and I came home with like this $10 silver cross, and what is that? And I wore it everywhere. Somebody said, well, you didn't know anything that was happening. I didn't know anything that was happening. I just knew I had been encountered by love. But then at 15, when they told me, we don't want you to go to hell, and you better get involved in this 5-step plan, and you better believe or else, and you better live right or else, and that was now my introduction into Christ. So my first encounter with love, my second encounter with love, my third encounter was in transactional conditional religion. What's going to happen to your soul to escape God's wrath? And for 30 some years, I spent a 5, a 4, a 3, no, a 4, a 5, a 5, a 4, a 3, 2's a devil, 4, 5, 3, 1 is Satan, 3, 4, 5, 5, 5, 5, 4, 5. Don't be deceived by 3. 3 people going to tell you 3, going to bust 2, going to bust your hell wide open. Oh my gosh. And I didn't even realize that my actual experience, that my understanding was actually blocking for me my true experiential my religious conditioning was blocking for me my true experiential understanding. And here's this man in John 5. Who healed you? I don't know. I partook of the goodness and power of something that I know nothing about. And I think many of us have, most of us, darn near all of us. I know me. I know Connie used to go up and up on eagle's wings, and she would sing it in, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. And she was this little girl, and she thought, maybe I want to be a nun. Why? Because what God has presented to you is this good being. This just good, benevolent being. And then when she got in her 20s, they said, hey, if you don't want to go to hell right now, get down to this altar. And she did. And she said, oh, my life was changed. But I think our lives get changed by God, and we're walking as healed, delivered people, but we don't know who really, we don't know nothing about the God that did it. And then somebody tells us about that God, and the things they teach us about that God go directly contrary to the things we experientially know about that God. So before we deal with the idea of who is Christ, before we explore that question, before we get to that place, I just want you to start with the idea that it's possible that something real has happened to you, that what you call your born-again experience, where you have a demarcation line. I was one way before that. I said a prayer and had faith in Christ. Something happened in me. I was transformed. My life, you put it down, the BC before Christ and the AD, right? Now, you put that down in history, but you put it down in my history. My life has been changed since that date. And I'm saying you could have lived like I did 15 years at the Pool of Bethesda. You could have lived like Connie did 23 years at the Pool of Bethesda. You could have lived like some of you did 46 years at the Pool. And then you had an experience and something changed you. And it's possible that thing changed you was real, and that the God that transformed you is real. But it's possible that before you could even find out who that God is, people with voices were telling you and contextualizing what happened to you, and that the contextualizing of what has happened to us is really completely unrelated to the truth of what has happened to us. God, I hope you're listening to what I'm trying to tell you. So who is Christ? We got 7 minutes. Got 7 minutes? Let's look at it on our screens. Who is Christ? Well, let's start with this idea of the biblical Christ. Right? Then we'll come down here with this idea of the historical Christ. Then we'll come over here with this idea of the mythical, or mythos, right? The story, the narrative, the beginning, middle, and end, the narrative structure of the cosmos, Christ. And somewhere in between, Christ biblical, Christ historical, and Christ mythical is, in my estimation, Christ actual. That Christ actual is not biblical. The biblical Christ doesn't show us, it shows us a lot, but not Christ actual. The historical Christ, there's certain things that we can learn from historical records. There's certain things we can learn from historical testimony. There's certain things we can learn in the biblical that tell us a lot about the historical. Just the manner in which he was killed suggests he was not a violent revolutionary. I mean, there's just things that we can deduce from the Christ historical, from Christ biblical, and then there's the narrative, what is told. We have mythical narratives about him, and I don't mean mythical as in false. I mean as in mystery, as in something not knowable or not unknowable, but infinitely knowable. We have the story surrounding Christ, which the story doesn't fully tell us all, the biblical doesn't fully tell us all, the historical doesn't fully tell us all, but right square in the middle, feeling the pull of these other things, almost floating in this positive negative charge, this kind of like a desk thing where they just had the little ball floating above the little desk display, is the actual Christ floating there. And it is the actual Christ now that follows the mythical idea and leads us to the second thing. And that second triangle is this, that we have the, it's not very, can you see it now? Let me get another color. We have the, that's not a triangle. Now we have the second triangle, Christ transcendent. C-E-N-D-E-N-T, transcendent, A-N-T? Anyone? E-N-T, yeah. Christ transcendent. What I mean by Christ transcendent, Christ that is outside of space and time, right? The transcosmic, transcosmic, universal, the Christ ever. Here, this Christ is what I would say is known, right? That which can be known of God is known. This Christ we would refer to, if we were talking from our lingo is the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was the Word was God, the Word was with God. All things were made by Him. Nothing was made but that wasn't made by the Word. So Christ transcendent, right? The Word, God, Christ known. And then we have here this other idea of Christ temporal. What do you mean by Christ temporal? Forgive my writing. That's why I typed that first thing out. I might do this better. Okay, Christ temporal. What do we call that? We don't call that the Word. We call Christ temporal Jesus. Right? That Christ temporal is Jesus in space and time, and that is revealed. We're talking about who is Christ. Who is Christ first starts with that, but somewhere in the biblical, the historical, and the mythical exists Christ actual, and then somewhere between Christ transcendent and Christ temporal, now we also have here Christ ongoing or Christ infinite. Christ infinite. And we call this the Spirit. Right? We refer to this as, if this is known and this is revealed, this is revealing. And somewhere in the triangle of Christ transcendent and Christ temporal and Christ ongoing or Christ infinite, we have right here in the middle, we have Christ living. We're not dealing with something that was dead a long time ago. We're dealing with something that preceded a long time ago, that existed a long time ago, and that is still ongoing here today. And somewhere in between, the idea of Christ actual and Christ living leads us to now the final thing, and you can screen capture this. I know I'm going very fast, but we're going to close here in our last minute, and we'll pick up with this next week. Now we go here, and where are we? We are one more triangle. I'm starting to be so. I'm maybe making this more difficult than I should. Here we go. We first have the Scripture. Then we have tradition. Then we have experience. Right? And in the middle of this is Christianity. Christianity. What is the Scripture? What people saw and documented. What is tradition? How people applied what they were seeing. What is experience? What we are now seeing. The Scripture gave us our doxy, or our doctrine. Tradition gives us our practice. But experience gives us our vision of revelation of what's being seen. Somebody say, that's what gets scary. I know that what gets scary. Why? Because when you're trained that the stakes are you better have the right answer out of the 5 or every individual is going to perish, it keeps you from seeing the truth. It's that chain, letting out, but you can only get so far. Why? Because you can only go so far if you're still trying to solve the Antichrist question of what's going to happen to chill God out so he doesn't put the beat down on everybody when they die. What's going to happen to chill God out that he made a hell which wasn't even for humans, but somehow humans keep ending up there. And he's not even close to winning because according to what you believe, he's winning somewhere between 2 out of 7 billion, or really about 500 million out of 7 billion, or maybe as low as 144,000 out of 7 billion. And God is this kind of sadomasochist playing this rule. And he's like, oh, I just totally messed up. I didn't know what I was doing. I wish I had thought this through. I totally blew it. And Satan got me, and he tricked me. And then Adam tricked me. And then Israel tricked me. And then the Christians tricked me. And then the Antichrist tricked me. And I just wish I could help everybody, but I can't. And the reason you can't go out past to see the larger truth, the reason Christ actual is hidden and we're not allowed to see Christ living is because our Christianity has floated either to the Scriptures or to tradition instead of existing right in this perfect place of a living Christianity rooted in a living Christ, rooted in an actual Christ that is not yet fully defined. Somebody said, what happened to me? I believe what happened to me, what happened to you, was we were transformed and changed by Christ living. But the problem is, Christ living that changed and transformed us, our experience was immediately set down in a Christianity that had doctrines and practices that were quite contrary to the experience we were actually living. And I am saying to you that before we get to the place of who is Christ, we've got to start with the idea that maybe it should not be the biblical that guides us, the historical that guides us, but the ongoing mystery. Maybe it should not be, maybe we should not be limited by just Jesus as Jesus was in space and time, but to who God was before and who God is being revealed as after, so that our Christianity won't be pulled too much towards what was seen or too much to what was practiced, but that our Christianity would be driven to what we are experiencing, what's being revealed. Somebody say, oh my God, you were going to lead people to hell. Do you see what happened? Your chain just got jerked. You can only go so far into the acceptance of what truth might be before you're snatched back with what? With the question, yeah, but Pastor Mike, you're not explaining what people are going to do to get the wrath of God off their soul, which is why we can't step a foot into truth until we first let go of the ridiculousness of that question. I'm begging you, for the sake of Christ, I'm begging you for the power of God that you know. You know you've been changed. I know I've been changed. But it took me 35 years to realize I was changed by something that I really didn't understand. And once I let go of that and said, okay, I'm going to stop assuming, A, that it's only way 5, way 4, way 3, way 2. I'm going to say, okay, I can admit maybe it's way one. But then as soon as I admit it's way one, I realize if that's really the nature of God to solve it for everybody, why was there going to be wrath and punishment on anybody? And once I let go of the question, the chain fell off. And I took my first step, not into Christ biblical or Christ historical or Christ mythical, but to the actual, who is God really? Which led me not to a Christ that was before time or a Christ that existed in time, but a Christ that exists right now, a Christ that's living, which now moved me to, okay, that must be what changed me, which made me to look at, okay, what does Scripture testify? What does tradition testify? But what is my experience going on now? And when you think of Christianity, what is it? It's the story of how God appears in religious and political settings and says, you're wrong about it. That change transforms a few hundred people, and that Christ says, I got more to tell you that you can't even handle. And then after Christ is gone, we find by the Spirit, Christ starts talking to people and starts talking to Peter and starts telling him stuff. Then God pulls another person aside and says, let me tell you, Jesus still talking week over week, blowing minds, making the picture bigger. And every time Christ appears to anybody, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, all the way through Romans, Galatians, anytime Christ appears to anybody, they end that encounter with a bigger picture than they had before. They end it less weaponized, less exclusive, less external, and they end it larger. They end it with more people in. They end it with a gooder picture of God. And what you and I have had happen to us is somehow this experience of God who transforms us has been superseded and blocked by a contextualization of a weaponized Old Testament idea of God that betrays Christ. And I'm saying until we shake off that Old Testament portrayal of God, we're not going to be able to shake off that co-opted idea of Christ. But if we lean into the Christ that healed us, even though we don't understand, we're able to shake off the Antichrist questions, eliminate and excuse ourselves from debates over the Antichrist answers so that we may finally step into some experiential truth about this thing that has transformed and revolutionized our lives so personally. But that will have to begin on next week. I hope you got something out of today. Very quickly before we go, I didn't think this was confusing, but let me make it not confusing. When people give financially to Connie and I and to this part of the church, somebody said, what are you doing? It simply was, is what we're saying helping you? Are you getting something out of it? If you're getting a little bit out of it, then you say, well, I give a little. If you're getting a lot out of it, then you give a lot. And I'm so blessed how people say, man, here's $35. You have no idea. A person said, here's $2. You have no idea. This doesn't represent anything about, because what I'm getting out of this would take $1 trillion to show you. But you know what do you think that does for Connie and I? What do you think it does for Connie and I when a person says, I'm between jobs, I've been listening for 2 months, going on a third month, and I just want to let you know that it's $5, but you've got to know, I wish it was $5 trillion. What do you think that does to Connie and I? Are we okay? Yeah. What do you think that does to Connie and I? When somebody goes, this is transforming my life, I wish this could be more. That makes us feel like, oh my God, people care. People care. Well, put the reverse in front of that. What do you think it does to Connie and I when we don't hear? A person wrote last week and said, oh my God, I've been trying to support you guys and I couldn't, but I just got a job. I just got my contract. And finally, oh, you have no idea how much this was. What? I've always wanted to show you guys how much I value this. That makes Connie and I feel like, okay, we're not crazy. We're not alone. And $2, $5. Somebody said this past week, I've been trying to do money. I'm going back in $15 for the first 10 weeks. Here's $150. Do you know what that means to Connie and I? I'll tell you what it means. When somebody says, I get nothing out of this at all. And my question is, if you get a little, give a little. If you get a lot, give a lot. Let your value be a reflection of what you're getting out of it. You say, well, a guy told me from Texas, he said, dude, what I'm getting out of it, I don't have that much money in the world to tell you what I'm getting out of it. I feel that love. Oh, I'm in a bad financial place, but you got to know that I'm getting so much out of it and I would help you if I get. We feel that love. But what happens when 100 people come on every week and they get nothing out of it? Well, I'm getting something out of it. Are you? It makes us feel like there's no value. But you know what we do? We just take the 100 names, we just zip them off, and then people say, oh my gosh, I was getting so much out of that. We don't know. We don't know. But somewhere in there, I'm asking you, what is this doing for you? If it's doing nothing, then why are you here? If it's doing a little, show us a little. If it's doing a ton, show us a ton. And that means something different to everybody. But I will tell you this, everybody in this church, 2 things. We show value by showing support. And number 2, We go out and live. And let me tell you, if you're not going out to live and to change lives and to live as love, what are you doing here? Why are you here? This is our church. Our church is about you going out every day and saying, God, today I'm going to find somebody. Today I'm going to find somebody. And not just going out on the streets, although the streets, but you could say, how can I help people? Let me find out who's doing the most for homeless women in my place. Let me find out who in my city is doing the most to help people who have been victims of domestic violence. Let me find out an LGBTQ mission, somebody that's taken into, let me find out what, wherever God puts on your heart to ease and eliminate suffering every single day, every single week. I want you to never sit down at a meal to eat your own thing without thinking, gee, I'm eating today, thank you, Lord, but I've also fed somebody in my city this month. I mean, that's how we want you to live. And it's a two-part church. And if you're not doing the first part and you're not doing the second part, then maybe you need to find a church that's about what you're about. But I encourage you, if you're not showing value, if you're not getting any value, God bless you. Go to a place where you're fed and stirred. But if you are getting value, show the value. But if you are getting value and you're showing value, go out today, tomorrow, next week. God, bring it across my path. Bring me an idea. Bring me a person. Show me somebody to love. Show me an idea, a vision, a way I can push back on the chaos of this world. That's what this church is about. And I thank you. And we bless you, and we bless God for you. And thank you for your support. Peace, health, protection, preservation, soundness, abundance, favor, prosperity, Zoe, goodness, light arising in the midst of darkness. Connie and I pray blessing on you every day. Peace, revelation of God, and of truth, and of love. What is living, what is real, what is actual, what is transforming, what is revealing. May it overtake us all. I declare this now in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you. Make it a great week. I kept you a few minutes longer than I wanted to, but I hope you heard me today. Once you move past the ridiculous question, you're now ready for the real question. Who is this that has transformed so many hundreds of millions and billions of us so personally? That's the real question, and that's the truth that we're after. We'll pick up with it next week. Make it a great week. Connie and I love you. My family loves you. Pop-Pop loves you. Kenobi loves you. You be blessed. See you next week.